Andrew Nesky. This is Science in the Outer Streams. We're here with part 2 of our interview with Sulak Sivaraksa and Marcus Braybrooke from the URI Initiative. Gentlemen, thank you for coming back. Before we get on to more of the details of the URI Initiative, both of you weren't born clergymen. I mean, at some point in your life, you made a decision that this is something that you wanted to do. Could I ask you, what made you decide to pursue the religious, philosophical, Buddhist perspective as a life's work?
Well, I was, of course, brought up in a Buddhist kingdom, and in our culture, most young men would become a monk for a short time. That's how you are trained spiritually, culturally, and to concern about your well-being as well as the well-being of your society. And then I went to England for further education. In fact, even at home, I went to a Catholic school.
Oh my.
And in England, I went to an Anglican college. And very much influenced by Christian priests, Christian brothers and sisters. At the same time, in England at that time, there was a Buddhist society run by Mr. Christopher Humphrey, who was very much influenced by Madame Blavatsky also.
Yeah.
You know, it's all interconnected.
Yes.
However, with Mr. Christopher Humphrey's theory, you know, he was the one who propagated Buddhism in England. But for him, Buddhism was only for personal well-being, for meditation, for peace, nothing to do with society. He said, leave that to the Christian, you see, and they made a mess of themselves because they're too much involved with society, and they left deep meditation. And for me, that's not quite right, you see. If the Christian don't meditate, that's their weakness.
Yes.
And I hope that they will also have deeper prayer and meditation. But for me, to be a Buddhist, particularly in the present day, in those days, not yet the 21st century, I think we ought to be involved, number one, our well-being and our social well-being. And I came from the part of the world where very much a village culture. And even my country is changing fastly to become the society become much more complex, industrial. And I feel that unless we can bring the teaching of the Buddha to be relevant to the more complex society, I think Buddhism will be just something, as Mr. Christopher Humphrey want, just for personal well-being. And you feel, I'm all right, Jack. So I feel that that's why I have to be involved in some way or the other. I call our group socially engaged Buddhism. And then I feel that as Buddhists, we should work with Christians, we should work with Muslims, because as I said earlier on, our brothers and sisters, that's how I got involved. And in my own country, I found that the Thai Inter-Religious Commission for Development. Development here means personal development, social development, before economic and technological development.
You know, that's very interesting. We talked a little before the show about the compartmentalism that seems to be going on in Western culture, this increasing schism between a person's interior life and their exterior life. I hope we'll be able to get back to that. But before we do, I really would like to ask you the same question that I just asked him. Yeah. How did you come to this?
Well, again, I was brought up in a Christian home. My mother was quite a devout Christian. My father had for a time been a clergyman, but before I was born, I don't think it was my fault. He'd given that up.
I see.
And but he continued to still have his arguments with God. Sometimes a bit unrepeatable at times. But so it was a home in which faith was taken seriously, even if it was an argumentative faith. And I don't think I've ever not believed in the reality of God. And I think of great sense, even from childhood, of a presence of God in nature. And then I suppose when I was about 13, I nearly drowned, and it may sound naive, but it made me sort of wonder, was there some reason why I hadn't drowned? And I think that sort of turned into a desire to try to be of service to other people, and one way of doing so seemed to be become a clergyman. And then at university, I think I still had this desire, but it was rather an effort to live a moral life. And there came sort of one sermon, I can remember that day, when I suddenly realised that God loved me through Jesus just as I was, that I didn't have to do anything, I didn't have to achieve God's favour, but it was a sheer gift of God's love. And I think from that I've seen both the desire to share and express something of that compassion to other people, but also to recognise that God's love is for every person. It's not dependent on, as I say, on our labels and so on. And most of the time I've also been in charge of a parish, so we've always had that support of a community, which I find very valuable. I think it's in the life, the shared life, that we often experience from other people, that love of God, but also the wonderful opportunity to travel and to involve myself with other faiths. And so that's, I think, so I've been able, I think, to combine that commitment to Christ. And I think what I would now say is that for me, it is in Jesus that I have known God's love. But I believe that same God is available through other faith traditions, and I don't think trying to compare one's experience is more important than another achieves anything. It seems to me a bit like the argument, is Eastern or Western music better?
Yes, yes. Definitely they do. There is a definite issue, I think, concerned with that, and it has to do with compartmentalism that I'd like to go forward with. But, I have to mention to you, most people that I have found that have come through this show that have been motivated, teachers, speakers, musicians, have often come through a place in their teenage years when there was a great questioning process that they found themselves involved in, usually around some event like being almost drowned, or the death of someone who's very close to them. That seems to ignite their questioning process. And that questioning process seems to carry people to the lofty places. I think in Buddhism it is that you must have a question for development. Is that not true?
Yes, indeed. Because in Buddhism, the Buddha said, don't even believe what he said. Question everything, you see, unless and until you find out that these teaching would put you into practice, and your experience will help you to become less greedy, less angry, less deluded, then you're on the right track.